Much of our food nowadays, some of it's imported, but a lot of it comes from far away. So it's not only just the people cost of growing it and the agricultural inputs, but it's the transportation cost to get it to the middle of the United States. Even if you're buying local, there's some transportation costs, and there's always the growing costs. And so don't waste it. It's money in the trash can.
Earth Day is celebrated every year on April 22nd to raise awareness and support for environmental protection. The first Earth Day was held in 1970, and it's now observed by millions of people in over 190 countries around the world. A Kansas State University Family Resource Management specialist says Earth Day is also an opportunity to make changes that are not only good for the environment, but also the family's budget. On today's Sound Living, simple tips that can help save money and energy. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish says that many family expenses, especially those in our primary spending categories, housing, food, transportation, and clothing, has some relationship to how we might affect planet Earth. Elizabeth, we don't always associate Earth Day with finances, but in a way there is a connection because everything we do, I guess, kind of comes back to the environment and kind of comes back to finances.
That's true. So if we think about Earth Day, it will be April 22nd. Actually, it's April 22nd every year, which I didn't realize until I was thinking about our conversation today. And I learned that the first Earth Day was celebrated in 1970. For those of us who maybe were young or around at that time. And it started when a U.S. senator from Wisconsin, organized this national demonstration to raise awareness about environmental issues. And ever since then, we've been celebrating Earth Day. And yes, there is a relationship between finances and what might be good for the earth. So what's good for your finances can also be good for the environment, if we look at it that way. If we think about the major sort of spending categories that we have, housing, food, transportation, clothing, each of those has some relationship to our decisions and then how that might affect the earth. So if we think about housing, some of our big expenditures relate to energy. Obviously, the house itself, the actual physical structure, that is a big chunk of change every month. But then within that is our energy bills, right? So our heating and cooling. Maybe at this time of year, we're still recovering from some heavy heating bills because it was so cold in January. But we're also getting ready for the cooling bills that are going to be coming up in the summer. And so this would be a perfect time to conduct a home energy audit. And you could save, if you do some basic upgrades, you could actually save money or spend less on your heating and cooling. For example, we often talk about increasing the amount of insulation you have in your attic or crawl spaces, and also programmable thermostats and the way that you use the thermostat as well.
Yeah, what's nice about the home energy improvements is the fact that these are going to save you money over time. There's that initial output if you're looking at some energy-saving appliances, right. But in the long run, they do end up kind of not really paying for themselves, but they do cut costs.
They can cut what you're spending on a monthly basis. You're right. There is an initial outlay. So, for example, if you were in a position or it was getting time for you to think about doing some upgrades to your furnace or your air conditioner or a water heater or any, like your refrigerator, any new appliance is likely to be way more energy efficient than even something that's 10 years old.
And one of the big changes is the fact that now you can actually see that right there on the tag as you're comparing one refrigerator to another. It's going to tell you which one cuts costs the most.
Right. They do have those required tags on them. Other ways that, if you're in a place to think about replacing windows or adding or replacing storm windows, that could be another place where you could save or cut your energy bills an average of 12% actually if you get Energy Star certified windows or storm windows. And a lot of these home energy upgrades or renovations may have tax credits associated with them. You have to make sure you understand the different programs, and some of them have expiration dates. Some of them may not. Some of them may come from the federal government, but then rebates might come from the energy companies that you do business with. So it's worth doing a bit of investigation. So we talked about programmable thermostats.
That's a real nice one because that's easy, fairly inexpensive to do, and you can tailor that to your lifestyle, and you save money at times when you're away from the house, and when you're there, it kicks back on. So really a lot of advantages to that.
Yeah, I would say you have to, are you smarter than a second grader, though? You have to figure out how to program it. But even if you don't, if you do some regular manual things, like when you leave the house in the morning, if there's not going to be anybody there and you're gone all day, in the winter, if you're using heat, turn it down a few degrees. You can turn it back up when you get home and then turn it back down when you go to bed. Opposite, when you're using air conditioning, when you're leaving for the day, turn it up a few degrees because no one's going to be there, and then turn it down again for comfort when you get home. So even if you don't have the actual programmable, you can be the programmer. You can do it manually.
And some of those have apps now, too, so you can do it. If you forget, you can do it when you're at work, too.
Yeah, well, and if you have some of those things, which obviously I do not because that doesn't come to my mind. We talk about, you and I talk about this pretty regularly about the drapes or curtains, any sort of window treatments you have. On a really cold day, you can leave them closed. But if there's going to be sun, open them so you get the radiational heating. Again, in the summertime, you want to keep them closed during the day, but you might open them in the evening when the sun isn't so hot. So if we move on to thinking about clothing. So first of all, we used to talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, right? But there is a fourth R, which could be refuse. So refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So buy less. To me, that's refuse, right? I mean, it's also a bit of reduce, but you're just not going to buy as many clothes. But the clothes that you do have, take good care of them. And part of that is mending or, whatever sort of clothing maintenance you need to do. But then also when you're doing laundry, think about doing full loads of laundry and washing on cool or cold water. You don't necessarily nowadays with detergent and everything need to wash on hot water. I mean, I think many of us probably would still want to do whites on hot because it just feels cleaner, right? But that can actually help cut down on energy use. Also, shorter cycles, if that will get the clothes clean. Now, obviously, if they're heavily soiled, you have to do the full cycle.
Does the dryer come into play here, too? Because I'm assuming that we probably tend to over-dry things by just putting it on a cycle and just not really paying attention.
Right. The dryer can come into play, and it can come into play in how we take care of our clothes, but then also the energy use of the dryer. And so many of our clothes actually do just fine if you air dry them. And in fact, depending on the fiber content, probably do better if you air dry them. I mean, if people wear wool sweaters or cotton, you don't necessarily need to, or you don't have to fully dry them, right? Unless you're like, oh, the dryer shrunk my jeans, right? So
that's always my excuse.
Yeah, exactly. But so, whatever you can air dry. And again, it depends on the time of year and what your facilities might be to be able to air dry. But they make some really sort of space-saving clothes racks that you can use too. And like many of our intimates, they actually do recommend air drying and not putting them in the dryer. Food. Let's talk about food. I think what's good for your finances and what's good for the earth is not to waste food, first of all. We have huge abundance in this country for the most part. So we tend to buy a lot. And many people don't plan for leftovers or they don't like leftovers. So they just throw it away. And really, and I don't mean to be shaking my finger at people because I'm guilty too sometimes. But I think especially with fresh produce, well, any food, because much of our food nowadays some of it's imported, but a lot of it comes from far away. So it's not only just the people cost of growing it and the agricultural inputs, but it's the transportation cost to get it to the middle of the United States. But, even if you're buying local, there's some transportation costs and there's always the growing costs. And so, just don't waste it. It's money in the trash can,
Yeah, and a lot of times it's just not checking the cupboard before we go to the store. We think we need something. In fact, we've got 14 of those. We just forgot that we had them. I think I read somewhere that you could probably eat for a couple of weeks just on what you have in your house if you were creative and thoughtful.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I guess I worry, in some ways, I worry less about canned goods or freezer goods, but fresh produce, meat, eggs, dairy, anything that will spoil quickly, don't overbuy that. I think what you're talking about is, often we talk about use the month of January or some other month when you have a lot, you're going to have a lot of other expenses. So plan to eat out of your kitchen stores, your food stores, your cupboard, your freezer, to maybe cut down on your grocery bills at that particular time. But you're right, because even those things go bad. And so we need to rotate them. We need to eat from our cupboards. So one thing you might do is if you do have sort of on autopilot and, I don't know if we need this, but we use it, so I'm just going to buy some more, is go through and look at the dates and organize them so that the ones that are set to expire first are up front and start using them.
And if you're able to shop at a farmer's market, there's kind of a dual purpose there because you get fresh fruits and vegetables, but you're also supporting local farmers.
Exactly. And we're coming up into that time. I'm getting excited. Some places have year-round farmers markets, and depending on how they're growing things, that could be good. But yes, as we come into spring, it'll be farmers market or farm stand time soon.
Anything else we can do in terms of making our dollars go farther and helping the environment?
So we didn't talk about insurance. So, we always say review your insurance policies annually because some of that has to do with understanding your coverage. And if there's any changes to your coverage, know what is covered. So, for example, floods are likely not covered. Earthquakes, we do have some earthquakes in Kansas. Sewer backups are likely not covered. Sinkholes are likely not covered. So understand what's covered in your typical policy and what might not be covered. Wind is another one, or like if it's windy and then your house gets wet, so you just have to understand the nuances of your coverage. Also, think about, again, what your insurance policy might cover in terms of lost perishable food if the power goes out or your freezer. Some of them do cover it. Some may not. It depends. So you just need to check your policy. And then we didn't talk about vehicles. If you're updating your vehicle or purchasing a new-to-you vehicle, think about electric. They're more and more easy to use. Find charging stations, all of that. But even if you don't go with electric, think about mileage and what sort of trips the majority of the time that you make, right? Do you need a really big car or a really big vehicle if most of your trips are one person and you're just local? You can think about it in that way, right? And then when you're out and about in your vehicle, try to combine trips. Don't just go one place, come home, one place, come home. I always have fun thinking about my circular route on the weekend, like how am I going to make it more energy efficient? And so don't do a lot of trips. And then also just think about how you drive, right? Driving the speed limit, not having the windows open if you're going above 45, those kind of things.
Yeah, making sure the tires are at the right inflation and all that.
Yeah, and doing the regular maintenance.
The other thing I thought about real quickly, just back to the food aspect, is all of the bags they have at the grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
You can take your own. You've got to wash it from time to time. Don't forget to wash those cloth bags from time to time. But that really can cut down on the amount of plastic bags that you have.
Right. And to me, that's a refuse, right? You're refusing a plastic bag. Or if you do use them, reuse them, right? As many times as you can. And as we get into the hot season or the warm weather, also thinking about having refrigerator or cool bags, cool packs that you can put the perishables in too if you're traveling in your car.
Really interesting because like I mentioned at the beginning, we don't often associate Earth Day with our finances, but they really are pretty interconnected.
Right. And so that's what's so fun about family resource management and personal finance. It touches every part of our life in some way.
That's Kansas State University Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish with some simple tips that can help save money and energy. For more information on managing family finances, contact your local county or district extension office. And to learn more about Earth Day, visit earthday.org. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program Produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.